Hello, hello, hello. I think you might have missed the intro. I'm a little confused and disoriented today. My computer clock is on Central Time and I'm on Eastern Time. And so I forgot to hit go live and played the intro without being live. I apologize for that. But we're going to just move on from there. This is Grasping Sasquatch Stories in Science. I want to thank all my regular followers for showing up. I want to thank any new followers or new people viewing the show. I appreciate that. I want to give a big shout out and thanks to um, the the group administrators that allow me to post the ads for my show. That's not something they have to do. You guys know who you are, and I really appreciate your support in that regard. Out of character, I want to start with a question that I didn't answer from last week. Jenky1044 had a question about whether when your hair stands up at end on attention, whether that represents fight flight. I hope Jenky's in here to hear the answer to this question. I'm not seeing them in there. I'm going to put that off until we get to the science part, just to give Jenky a chance to come to get in here. As usual, I'm going to start with a story. We're still on fight flight. Today we're going to be finishing up guided imagery, and we're going to be moving into the most powerful reconditioning technique I know, and that's called stress inoculation. But I'll tell my story before that. Like last week's story, this story features a friend, John Eves. May he rest in peace. He's passed recently. And last week I talked about how they got bombarded by Bigfoots when they continued to press on and had to hightail it out of there. Well, a few weeks later, we kind of had an informal expedition at that same location, and we were all interested in having John show us exactly where that place was. So we kind of had an informal gathering, 3-mile hike in, which was frankly, a bit for me. But we got to the trailhead where that event happened, and John began to take somebody else in. He wanted to take this person in. I was kind of disappointed because I wanted to, get the lowdown on that. But they went in there, and this isn't a very long flight story. And probably 3 minutes later, came out. What's going on, John? Why are you guys out so quick? You couldn't have gotten there that fast. Well, the gentleman that he took in, whose name is escaping me right now, said as they started to walk in, they heard a kind of, I'm going to call it a snuffle, or kind of a, and that was enough for the guy that he was with to say, I'm getting the heck out of here. So they came out, and I was next in line to go in with John. Not much of a fight-flight story, a fight-flight response, beyond the fact that as soon as this person heard that sound, they didn't know whether it was a bear or a Bigfoot making that sound. But as soon as he heard that, that was enough for him. He decided to flee and turned around, and they got right back out of there. I was fortunate enough to go in a few minutes later with John. And just to kind of fill out the story from my perspective, we had to climb over fallen trees and under fallen trees on this narrow path. And I mean, massive trees that were blocking the path. And we kind of sat there quietly once we got to a location, no activity. John turns to me and asks me, "Do you want to go sit on their front porch?" Sure, why not? So he took me up the ridge a little bit from where we were stationed, and we sat there, what he was calling their front porch. Nothing happened. And with nothing happening, John picked up a stick, made sure it was solid, picked a solid tree, and did a single tree knock. And just like a home run hit being knocked out of the park with a baseball bat, we heard a tree knock, or whatever you might want to call them, come back just as clear as day. The rest of the group was still at the trailhead, and they made some other tree knocks, and we couldn't get another response. But the thing that impressed me about this tree knock was the crystalline quality of it. It was so clear and so resonant, and crystalline is the best way I can describe that. Neither him or I experienced a fight-flight response. The fight-flight story was how quickly they came out when they first heard that kind of snuffle, snuffle, kind of like a horse snuffle or a bear snuffle, or a Bigfoot snuffle. But that was an awesome experience for me, being the second guy in. That was the first tree knock I have ever heard. There's some debate whether they're tree knocks, whether they're smacking their lips, whether they're clapping their hands in front of their mouth, and that's grist for another show. So before we get into the science behind fight flight, I want to give a brief summary for the new folks. Again, we first started just with a broad conceptualization of what fight flight is, showed the autonomic nervous system, had a verbal definition of what fight flight was, and then we began to get into relaxation and the necessary steps that are involved in reprogramming your autonomic nervous system, your automatic nervous system, if you will, so that you can modulate your fight-flight response. In conversations with people this week, some of them, well, two things have been motivated. One, I just want to say, be kind to each other, be kind to people that may have a differing perspective than you. I kind of got attacked by a guy on one of the groups that I go on to on occasion, because he thought he had me pinned and totally misread my philosophy, and got kind of a personally attacking me. There are different schools of thought about what Bigfoot is. And if you're in the Bigfoot community, you may believe in flesh and blood. You may believe in interdimensional creatures. You may believe they're spiritual demons, Nephilim. I just want to preach tolerance of other people's views, because the fact of the matter is, we don't have much scientific proof to really support any of those different kinds of theories. I think at this point, there's maybe a little bit more for the flesh and blood creatures through Jeff Meldrum's work, with the footprints, but largely Bigfoot is unexplored from a scientific perspective, and that's part of the reason why the scientific community won't accept it. They continue to reject Bigfoot as a known species. But when you start interacting with people that have a differing view from you, I would encourage you to sit and listen and try to really appreciate their view rather than attacking each other's view. There are enough people outside of the Bigfoot community that look at those of us in it as Looney Tunes or crazy folks because we believe in Bigfoot. And infighting then amongst ourselves, it just doesn't help that situation at all. And I'll get off my soapbox on that issue. The other thing is, now that we're moving into the reprogramming techniques, I do want to give a caution or a disclaimer, if you will. Presenting these techniques through my podcast and presenting these techniques in my book should not be a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy. If you've got a moderate to severe PTSD, maybe even a mild PTSD, or a moderate to severe anxiety disorder or depressive disorder, my book isn't designed to provide psychological treatment, although the techniques that we're discussing I've used very much with treating PTSD patients, depression patients, and other anxiety disordered patients. It's not a substitute for going to counseling with a licensed clinical specialist. The reason they're included in this series is not so much as a suggestion for treatment as it is a suggestion for how to prevent a prevention of developing a fight-flight response if you don't want to have one, and from developing PTSD or some other kind of anxiety disorder from your Bigfoot experience. So there are professionals out there that are familiar with these techniques, and if you're really suffering from a significant problem, just reading my book and practicing these techniques on your own may not be enough. There's nothing wrong with getting professional help in that regard. The reason I chose to include them in my book, in case you haven't noticed, most of these techniques are really tapping into your own abilities to help yourself, teaching you how to relax yourself, teaching yourself deep breathing. These are things on one level that you already know how to do. If you've ever been startled and then realized somebody was just messing with you, what happens? You go, I can't believe you did that to me. Okay. The deep breathing takes care of itself when we're in that frightening or fearful situation. Learning to relax, barring a significant sleep disorder, you know how to relax. You relax every night when you go to sleep. In an episode, probably in two episodes, we'll get into self-hypnosis. Every night when you go to sleep, you pass through a hypnagogic level of trance. When you wake up every morning from sleep, you pass through a hypnopompic level of trance. So you go into trance, whether you're aware of it or not, when you go to sleep and as you're waking up. And all self-hypnosis is really doing is teaching you to identify that level of consciousness and stay in that level of consciousness and then do some work with yourself. So that's why I chose to present them in these techniques in this series, and that's why they're in the book complete with scripts, because these are skills you naturally have within yourself And with a little bit of guidance, you can begin to master these skills for yourself. But never hesitate to reach out for help if you need it. They're not a substitute for counseling and therapy. So let's pull up the slides here. Again, we're continuing with fight flight. Believe it or not, the show will eventually reach a point where we get beyond fight flight. The show is gonna feature other topics besides these, but I think fight flight was a good place to start because it's a skill. The relaxation skill is the fundamental skill that you need to master before you need to go on to reprogramming any of your abilities. And we went over relaxation training. Today we're going to finish up in guided imagery. And then we're going to go into the true reprogramming technique, stress inoculation, also known as systematic desensitization, self-hypnosis. And I'm going to share a neuro-linguistic programming technique called the swish pattern with you. Some people would argue, some therapists might argue, that even when you get into relaxation training, I taught pursed lip breathing, autogenic relaxing, and the progressive relaxation. Progressive relaxation being the tensing and relaxing. Autogenic, now I'm relaxing my right arm, feeling more calm, feeling more peace. Pursed lip breathing, just forming a tight little O with your lips, and when you exhale, exhaling through those pursed lips. If you are being treated for a psychotic disorder, schizophrenia, schizotypal disorder, any psychologic disorder where you have trouble connecting and staying in reality, there are more than one or two therapists that would advise against even doing relaxation training on your own. And the reason for that is because as we relax, we lower our psychological boundaries. And people with schizophrenia, people with psychotic disorders, part of the reason they have those disorders is that their psychological boundaries between themselves and reality, themselves and the world, themselves and other people are already blurred and diffuse. And when you do relaxation, you're breaking down those boundaries a little bit. So again, if you're being treated for some form of psychosis, these things would be better done under the supervision of a psychologist or a psychiatrist. In guided imagery, same disclaimer, same kind of warning to you. Because in guided imagery, once you're relaxed, you're going to then use your imagination. I went over relaxing in a peaceful place. Just after you're relaxed, imagining yourself. I like to imagine myself laying by a stream under a tree. But the point is you're taking yourself somewhere else. And again, that revolves around letting down your psychological boundaries. We're not going to talk much about, I'm not going to cover safe place today at all, because that's a big part of self-hypnosis. And I will go into that in detail when we cover self-hypnosis. Positive visualization is one of the first skills that you can begin to use to reprogram or to set an appropriate level of arousal for yourself when you're doing these techniques. If I were going to use positive visualization for a Bigfoot encounter, I would imagine what that encounter is going to look like, get relaxed, take myself through it step by step, and visualizing myself maintaining control, having a positive experience or a positive interaction with the Bigfoot. Most interactions with Bigfoots, but not all, tend to be positive or at least benign for most people. But the point is with positive visualization, you're using your imagination to create a positive story about your encounter with the Bigfoot. Again, if you're being treated for psychotic disorder, do this under the supervision of a psychiatrist or a psychologist who's well versed in these issues. Stress inoculation. Here we go. This is the most, in my experience, and again, I know some clinicians attend my show and they may have a differing opinion, and which reminds me, if you have questions, please put them in caps. If you're going to talk amongst yourself, keep it in lowercase, but I'll try and answer questions as I go. And that brings me back to Jenke 1044's question that I missed last week that I wanted to get to. Jenke, I'm not sure if you're here. I'm not seeing you in the chat, but hopefully you'll listen to this and hear the answer to the question. Jenke's question was an awesome question. He asked, if the hairs on your arm stand up, is that fight flight? If that, under a stressful situation, be it a Bigfoot encounter that's frightening, or any kind of stressful situation, if you get your hair standing at attention, that in and of itself wouldn't be considered fight flight. Fight flight is when there's kind of a cascade of multiple symptoms like we discussed earlier. Rapid and shallow breathing, heart racing, adrenaline pumping through your body, pupils dilating, muscles tensing. And those symptoms together are part of the fight flight response or fight flight syndrome. If the only thing you're experiencing is your hair standing on end, I would rather than calling that fight flight, I would call that autonomic arousal. Again, the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that I keep referring to as the automatic nervous system, because in concert with some structures in your brain, it takes care of all those automatic responses. You don't have to think to breathe. You don't have to think to blink. You don't have to think to make your hair grow consciously. You don't have to think to make your skin flake off, maintain your heart rate. All these things are mediated by the automatic or the autonomic nervous system. But when your hair stands up on end, that is an autonomic response, but that symptom in isolation would not be considered a full-blown fight-flight response. Any questions about that before I move on to stress inoculation and systematic desensitization? No questions. Okay. So, stress inoculation, that's what it's called in the current nomenclature in psychology and psychiatry. Back in the day when I first started my training, I'm 64, finished high school in 77. It used to be called systematic desensitization. Stress inoculation kind of fits. You go to a doctor to get an inoculation for a flu or a virus. We've been through that with COVID. Typically, they give you a little bit of the germ, and that little bit of the germ builds up your immunity to the disease, whatever the illness or disease might be. And in fact, that's what we're doing with stress inoculation. We're starting by giving you, once you learn and to master deep relaxation, you're then exposing yourself to mild levels of stress and teaching yourself to stay relaxed through that stressful situation. And once you can stay completely relaxed through imagining that stressful situation 3 times in a row, you then move up to the next higher level of the stressful situation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the first step in stress inoculation is to get real good at achieving a deep state of relaxation. That's why this series, when we started these techniques, focused on relaxing. If you don't take the time to master relaxation and get deeply, deeply relaxed, any of these other reprogramming techniques that I'm going to be passing on to you are going to be ineffective. Because again, the fight-flight response is considered automatic. You don't have to think about it for it to happen. It'll happen on its own. Okay. It's a powerful, hardwired into our body physical and emotional response. And so you've got to be very good in relaxing very deeply, because we're going to be pairing that relaxed state with that stressful state. And as we get into the details of how to do this, I'll teach you the tricks on how to allow the relaxation to win out over the stress response. But if you don't take the time to master relaxation, you're not going to be able to win out over that fight-flight response or over that stress response, whatever it may be. So you don't want to rush through your relaxation training. It should take you a good 3-4 weeks, 3 times a week. If you're doing relaxation, any of the 2 techniques that I taught you, or just the deep breathing, it should take a good 3 to 4 weeks of practicing that so that you can get deeply relaxed, typically within 5 to 20 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes after the initial 25 to 35 minutes when you first start practicing. And so you've got to ensure that you have become an expert in relaxation before you move on with these reprogramming techniques. I can't emphasize that enough. Now, I don't know how many people know what brainstorming is. In the sense that I was taught brainstorming, you just start blurting out thoughts, and you're blurting out or writing down thoughts without critically evaluating them. You're not thinking, oh, that's a good idea, that's a bad one, that really doesn't make much sense, this one does. You just kind of stream of consciousness start writing down thoughts. Since we're reprogramming our fight-flight response for a Bigfoot encounter, you want to start writing down Bigfoot encounter scenarios. And you want to include Bigfoot encounter scenarios that are relatively innocuous, relatively unintimidating, like hearing a tree knock from a distance, or hearing a Bigfoot roar across the valley, 5 miles across the valley. It may even be just thinking about having a big, a low stress idea might just be preparing to get ready to go on for a Bigfoot expedition. I still get excited. I've got one coming up here in November, and a day doesn't go by where I'm not thinking about how cool it's going to be back out into the woods and doing that. So you're brainstorming very weak, stressful Bigfoot encounter situations, moderate Bigfoot encounter situations, like maybe the night before, as you were walking down a path, you heard a tree knock, but it seemed pretty close to you. Okay. And again, I'm sharing my biases here. What I call a moderate Bigfoot scenario may be a mild Bigfoot scenario for somebody else, or maybe a strong stressful Bigfoot scenario for other people. So this is a subjective process, and there aren't any right or wrong answers. So you're just any Bigfoot scenario that comes to mind, you uncritically put that down on a piece of paper, one line at a time, just making a long list of any Bigfoot scenarios you'd like to encounter, or you have encountered, or you think might be interesting to encounter, or could be stressful to encounter. And you don't evaluate them as you're writing them down. Brainstorming is just uncritically thinking about these situations and writing it down on paper. Everybody clear about what brainstorming is? Now we're going to get into some psychobabble. Assign subjective units of distress to each of those scenarios you described. That subjective units of distress are called SUDs. And generally, I encourage people to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. For me, hearing that roar 5 miles across the valley, I would rate that maybe a 1 or a 2. Hearing that tree knock ahead of us on the path, but still at a good distance, I might rate that a 3 or 4 or 5, just depending on how close it comes. An example of a 10 would be coming face to face with a Bigfoot, seeing one at 20 feet. Or I shared my own story about when I got growled at by a Bigfoot. That was a moderate to high stressful situation. I would rate that as an 8 or a 9. As I said, it made some orifices pucker. So you want to try and imagine yourself in that situation and rate the stress that you experience as you're imagining that situation on a scale of 1 to 10. And what you're going to find is you're going to have more than 1 or 2 ones, 2s, 3s, 4, 5, 6, 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. And if you don't, you want to take the time to make sure you do. You don't want to have just one scenario that you rate a 1, and then the next scenario you rate a 3 or a 4. you've got to imagine other scenarios that will come up that will fall under the level of a 2. Because we're going to start with the weakest and gradually work our way up this ladder of stressful situations. So I generally try and encourage people to try and have at least 3 examples at each level. So you've written down the scenarios through brainstorming. Then you imagine yourself in each scenario and rate the stress level of that scenario from 1, meaning just it barely provokes any anxiety or stress in you, to 10 on the extreme end, meaning you would expect to have a fight flight response or a panic attack or to, a significant emotional and physical reaction. Any questions about that? Because this is where it gets real important. You've brainstormed your you've brainstormed your ranking, your rating how much stress each of those scenarios provokes in you, or anxiety it provokes in you. And so you just put a little number. Well, that one's a 1. That one's a 2. You put a number beside each of those scenarios. That's your subjective units of distress. And again, if you can't get to 3, be sure to have at least 2 of each level. But frankly, the more the better. If you can have 4 to 5 at each level, yes, the inoculation process is going to take longer, but the more refined you make that process, the more successful you're going to be. I think in my book, I started my initial brainstorming. I maybe had 10 or 15. And by the time I got them all rated and ranked, I ended up having like 30 or 35 levels of different stressors, from the weakest to the strongest. The smaller the steps between a 1 and a 2, a 2 and a 3, a 3 and a 4, so on and so forth, the better. So you've now brainstormed, you've assigned your subjective units of distress to each of those scenarios. Now, because you're going to have ties, you're going to have multiple 1s and multiple 2s and multiple 6s and multiple 8s and 10s. You've got to break those ties. So you got to rank them, starting with the weakest to the most intense. So thinking about going on a Bigfoot expedition, I would rate as a 1. I would also rate as a 1 driving to the expedition. I would also rate as a 1 arriving at camp and setting up. But we've got to rank those from lowest to highest. Well, I kind of just read them out from lowest to highest to me. The closer I get to the expedition, the more my nerves or anxiety or stress level or excitement even builds as I get closer to the site. So the point here is, once you've got all your subjective units of distress rated, you then got to break all those ties so that your 1s start with the weakest 1, then the next strongest number 1, then the next strongest number 1, before you go to number 2, which is more stressful or more anxiety provoking or more exciting than any of the 1s. And you got to go through and break all those ties so that you're starting with the lowest stressor. And by the time you get down to your 10 ratings, you're at your highest level of stressors. But again, for me, seeing a Bigfoot at 20 or 30 feet, I'd rate that probably as a 10. That would be a low 10 for me. Seeing that Bigfoot charging me, at me, seeing its physical body coming towards me, that's a higher 10. It hasn't happened often, and I hope it never happens to me, but that Bigfoot reaching out towards me and grabbing my clothes and beginning to drag me off, that's a real high 10. So again, you're breaking down, after rating your subjective units of distress, you're breaking all the ties at each number level so that it goes from the weakest at that number to the strongest of that number. Is this making sense to you all so far, guys? Somebody give me a thumbs up if you're understanding what I'm telling, or if you're not understanding what I'm telling you, please ask some questions. I don't want to have to rush through this because this is the most powerful technique as far as I'm concerned. And this is a technique, if you want to reprogram your fight-flight response, this is the technique I would suggest you use. Thank you, Uncle Bones, for the thumbs up. Everybody else agreeing with Uncle Bones there, that you're understanding the subjective units of distress and then ranking them from lowest to highest within each number, 1 through 10, and lowest to highest from 1 through 10. Okay, great. Thank you. Sumati, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Nice to see you guys. So now we're going to get into the stress inoculation process. And as usual, time flies. I've got about 10 minutes left in the show. The last part is actually doing the stress inoculation process. And here it is, steps 1 through 6. And again, all this is in my book. Here I go, forgetting it again. Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research. When I started writing the book, I called it Bigfoot Prep, a primer for Bigfoot fieldwork, because the information contained therein is to prepare you to go out and encounter a Bigfoot. My first editor suggested a different title, Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research. And now when it's published by Hanger One Publication, it's going to be renamed again, the same name as my podcast, Grasping Sasquatch. The neat thing about Grasping Sasquatch is it's going to have those QR codes. So you can just scan those into your computer and look at the pictures, listen to some of the sounds that I reference in the book. So moving on with the stress inoculation, the actual stress inoculation, the inoculation process itself is numbers 1 through 6. You get deeply relaxed. Once you're at that deep state of relaxation, you're going to start with your lowest rank 1 scenario. In your relaxed state, you use your imagination or create a mental movie of you experiencing or going through that scenario. And as you're running that mental movie frame by frame or imagining it step by step, if you begin to feel your relaxation wane, if you begin to feel some tension building up, you stop the mental movie. You stop the imaginary scenario. Put that scenario to the side. Go back to your relaxation and relax back down to where you were before that mental movie started affecting your relaxation. Once you're relaxed back down to that previous level, you pick up where you stopped the mental movie. You pick up the mental movie just before it interfered with your relaxation. Again, and that's an important point. You're picking up the mental movie just before it started interfering with your relaxation. And you begin to run that mental movie again, either towards its natural ending without affecting your relaxation at all, or if as you're running that mental movie, you notice it again affecting your relaxation, you stop the mental movie, relax back down again to where you were before it affected your relaxation, and pick up the mental movie just before it started affecting your relaxation. And you continue going through that process on your lowest rated stressor, the lowest one you've got, lowest number one you've got, your ranked lowest stressor. And again, pick up the mental movie until you finally reach the end of that mental movie. Maybe you got to stop. Some people, I've had some clients actually be able to breeze right through the ones. They're already able to stay relaxed through the number ones. That's not going to be true for everybody. Because again, you want to stay deeply and comfortably relaxed as you're running this mental movie. And as soon as it affects that relaxation, you stop, set the mental movie aside, relax back down to where you were before it affected your relaxation, and then pick up with the mental movie just before it affected your relaxation and run it forward again, either until you reach the end or it affects your relaxation again. If it affects your relaxation again, you stop, do your relaxation exercise till you're relaxed, deeply relaxed again, pick up the mental movie just before it affected your relaxation, and continue to run it either till the end or until it affects your relaxation again. You keep practicing this same process until you can run the mental movie completely through while staying completely relaxed 3 consecutive times, 3 times in a row. You don't move on to number 2, which would be your second most stressful, subjectively SUDS rated number 1. You don't move on to your second number 1, which is ranked 2, until you can stay completely and deeply relaxed through your number 1 3 times in a row. And again, this one is not something you want to rush. You need to take the time it takes to be able to stay completely relaxed through that first mental movie 3 times in a row. And when you can do that, only then do you move up to your second highest number 1 or your second ranked stressor. And you rinse and repeat that process. Get deeply relaxed, run the mental movie. If it affects your relaxation, stop the mental movie, relax back down. Once you're as relaxed as you were before your relaxation was affected by the mental movie, pick up the movie just before it affected your relaxation and run it again through, either until the end or until it affects your relaxation again. If it affects your relaxation again, stop the mental movie, relax back down, pick up the mental movie just before it affected your relaxation and run it. And you just keep recycling, rinsing and repeating that process until you can get through each of those scenarios 3 times in a row. And not surprisingly, well, the inoculation process, again, to go with that metaphor, we're giving you a little bit of the germ. We're giving you a little bit of the stressor. And that's why we're starting with the weakest stressor or exciter or anxiety producer and mastering it before we move up to the next one, and mastering it before we move up to the next one and the next one. You don't skip ahead. Skipping ahead will only slow you down and hurt that process. So you keep going, rinsing and repeating until you get to your highest stressor. Odds are the higher you go, the more time your relaxation may be interrupted. And it may take longer to get through some of the higher stressors, which is why it's very important to not move on to the next highest until you've done it 3 times, successfully staying relaxed throughout the entire mental movie. Let's see what I got next here. Stress inoculation do's and don'ts. Oh, Mr. Mitchell has a question. Do you have any suggestions for people who have trouble visualizing? That's a very good question. I find that the more I had a hard time visualizing when I started learning these techniques. And what I found is the deeper I get relaxed and the more I can shut off my conscious mind, the thinking mind, if you will, the more likely you're going to be able to get true visualizations, almost like you're dreaming. But if you're not getting those kind of those vivid dream images, it does, and you don't have to, you can just imagine what that would be like. Imagine what that would feel like. Think about the smells that might go along with that scenario. Think about how your body would feel in those scenarios. Think about the tastes, all your senses. The more you focus on and bring in all your senses to each of these scenarios, the more successful you're going to be. I'm going to quickly run through the do's and don'ts. Excuse my sniffling. Do practice stress inoculation at least 3 times a week. Don't move on to the next highest stressor until you've mastered the level you're on. Do take your time. I've said this stuff already. Rushing ahead without mastery will actually slow you down in the long run. Also very important is to continue to practice your regular relaxation exercises consistently. Do it more frequently than the inoculation process. So you got to be doing your regular relaxation in addition to your reconditioning techniques. Mr. Mitchell, did I answer your question? I don't want to. I kind of feeling like I rushed past it. My answer to your question was, if you can't visualize, maybe you can feel it. If you can't see it, you can feel it. If you can't feel it, maybe you can imagine what it would smell like or taste like. The smell of the trees or the smell of the air. Taste and smell are two of our strongest senses. And by, yes, engaging your other senses, even if you don't get visualization, you just work with those other senses. Some people, not all people process information visually. Some process it auditorily, the sounds that you hear, the sensations in your body, taste, smells, so on and so forth. As you're going through the stress inoculation process, review your SUD scores and your rankings. They're likely to change as you go through, and then re-rank them. Well, my closing is about 3 minutes long. Any quick questions I can answer before we wrap it up for today? That's the stress inoculation. I go into much more detail in my book. I lay out my own hierarchy, step by step by step, take you through it step by step, and my own script. Any questions? Okay. Going once, going twice. Thank you very much for your interest in my show. I hope to see you next week. We're going to move on to another exciting technique. And remember to keep your mind open, your boots on the ground, and your heart with your higher power. God bless you. Be safe. I thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I see you running out of reason. Don't try to blame it on the seasons. Why you wanna walk away? When we began, swear we had something that would last. Baby, has the feeling fast. Falling in was easy. How do I make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Oh, I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Was I a fool? I know sometimes I may wonder, but I would never leave asunder a thing as good as what we have. Is it a rule? What's good is worth the fighting. There ain't no denying that you and I were made to last. Falling in is easy. How can we make it stay? I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. Tried and true. I'll never let go of you. Tried and true. can't go back to the start. I'll never let go of you, tried and true. I'll never let go of you, tried and true. Tried and true.
Wanna do it all with you by my side. If you're in, meet me here tonight. Be brave and come along, I'll be alright. Promise we don't